Kicked out by my husband's family, I returned after 15 years, and they begged me for forgiveness. I still remember the weight of Catherine Whitmore's gaze the first time we met. Not the warmth of a potential mother-in-law, but the cold calculation of someone assessing a threat. I was 23, wearing my best dress, the only one without a subtle tear or patch, and clutching James's hand like it was my lifeline. Maybe it was. "So, Olivia," she'd said, swirling her Chardonnay with practiced elegance, "James tells me you work at, what was it again? A bookstore?" The way she said it made bookstore sound like sewage plant. I smiled anyway, because that's what you do when you're young and in love and desperate to be accepted. "Yes, ma'am. Morton's Books on 5th. I'm the assistant manager." Catherine exchanged a look with her daughter Vanessa, a look I'd soon become intimately familiar with. It conveyed an entire conversation without words. "Can you believe this girl? Does she honestly think she belongs here?" "How quaint," Vanessa said, her smile tight as a piano wire. "And where did you attend university?" "Community college," I answered, feeling the words shrink in my mouth. "I studied English literature for 2 years before I had to." Before she had to help support her mother, James interrupted, squeezing my hand. "Olivia's incredibly hardworking." His father, Robert, barely looked up from his phone. Admirable." But I heard what he didn't say. Not admirable enough for a Whitmore. That dinner was just the beginning. A preview of the next 3 years of my life. The Whitmore world was nothing like mine. They owned property across 3 states, summered in places I'd only seen in magazines. Their silverware was heavier than some of my textbooks had been. And I was the intruder, the gold digger, the fortune hunter. What they never understood was that I fell in love with James before I knew about the family money. We met at my bookstore when he ducked in from the rain, browsing the classics section while his Italian leather shoes dripped onto our worn carpet. He asked about Virginia Woolf with genuine interest, not pretension. We talked for an hour. When he asked for my number, I gave it without hesitation. Our courtship was a whirlwind. Midnight conversations about books, dreams whispered between kisses, plans sketched on napkins over coffee. James saw me, really saw me, when most of my life I'd felt invisible. "They'll come around," he promised after that first disaster dinner. "They're just protective." I believed him, because I wanted to. Because when you're in love, you convince yourself that love conquers all, even old money prejudice and family dynasties. Our wedding was small but elegant, nothing like the society affair Catherine had envisioned for her only son. I wore my mother's restored dress, which Catherine called charmingly economical, with that same tight smile. Vanessa performed her maid of honor duties with mechanical precision, never once looking me in the eye. My side of the church was embarrassingly sparse. Just my mother, 2 cousins, and a handful of friends from the bookstore and community college. The Whitmore side overflowed with business partners, socialites, and people who simply had to be invited. "Darling, you've married beneath yourself," I overheard Catherine tell James at the reception. She didn't know I was around the corner, fixing the hem of my dress. But I suppose she's pretty enough. Just don't let her drag you down. James defended me, of course. Said I was brilliant and kind and exactly what he wanted. But he didn't tell his mother she was wrong. Didn't demand respect for his new wife. It was the first of many small betrayals. Life as Mrs. Whitmore should have been a dream. We moved into a beautiful brownstone, purchased with family assistance, a string attached that would later become a noose. I quit my bookstore job because James insisted I didn't need to work. Instead, I tried to find my place in his world. I joined committees, attended charity galas, smiled through lunches with Vanessa and her friends, who talked around me rather than to me. I redecorated our home 3 times trying to make it feel like mine. Nothing worked. I remained the outsider. "Darling, that's not how we do things," Catherine would say, correcting everything from how I held my fork to how I addressed the housekeeper. "Oh, Olivia," Vanessa would laugh. "You're so refreshing." Refreshing. Code for unsophisticated, unrefined, unworthy. The cracks in our marriage appeared slowly. James worked longer hours, climbing the corporate ladder at his father's company. I grew more isolated, more desperate for validation. When I suggested going back to work, James frowned. What would that look like? A Whitmore wife stocking shelves. I could finish my degree, I countered. Maybe next year, he said, but next year never came. Instead, what came was financial trouble. Whispers at first, investments gone wrong, market fluctuations. Then louder concerns. James grew distant, distracted. Started taking calls behind closed doors. I found the papers by accident. Loan documents, gambling debts, money withdrawn from accounts I didn't know existed. It's just a rough patch, James insisted when confronted. Dad's helping me sort it out. But his eyes wouldn't meet mine, and I knew then that sorting it out would come with a price. A week later, Catherine and Robert summoned us to dinner. The tension was thick enough to choke on. We've been reviewing the situation, Robert said, clinical as a surgeon. And we've identified the problem. Catherine's eyes locked onto mine. Your lifestyle is unsustainable, James. The spending, the socializing. My lifestyle? James echoed, confusion evident. Since your marriage, Vanessa clarified with practiced sympathy. The numbers don't lie. I felt the blood drain from my face. You think I'm responsible for James's financial problems? Not intentionally, perhaps, Catherine said, reaching for her wine. But influence is a powerful thing. They had spreadsheets, timelines, a neatly packaged narrative with me cast as the villain, the commoner who corrupted their son with expensive taste and reckless spending. It was a masterful manipulation. And the worst part? James didn't immediately defend me. His silence hung in the air like an accusation. That's not fair, he finally said, but weakly, without conviction. I looked at my husband, really looked at him, and saw what I'd been refusing to see. He would never choose me over them, never stand firm against the tide of family pressure. In that moment, something inside me cracked. Not loudly, not completely. Just enough to let the doubt seep in. Just enough to make me wonder how this would end. I didn't know then that the answer would come sooner than I thought. That within days, my entire world would collapse around me. That they would make sure of it. 3 days after that disastrous dinner, James left for a business trip to Seattle. An emergency meeting, he said. Couldn't be rescheduled. Couldn't be handled remotely. I'll be back in 4 days, he promised, kissing my forehead. We'll sort everything out then. I believed him. One last time, I believed him. The morning after he left, I was still in bed when the doorbell rang. Not a gentle chime, but an insistent, repetitive buzz that suggested whoever was outside had no intention of leaving. Pulling on my robe, I stumbled downstairs, half expecting a package delivery or perhaps a neighbor. Instead, I opened the door to find Catherine and Vanessa Whitmore, flanked by a man in a crisp suit I didn't recognize. Good morning, Olivia, Catherine said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. May we come in? Before I could answer, they swept past me into the foyer. The strange man followed, carrying a leather portfolio. What's going on? I asked, suddenly aware of how vulnerable I looked in my old cotton robe, hair uncombed, face bare. We're here to help you pack, Vanessa said, her voice sickly sweet. Isn't that thoughtful of us? My stomach dropped. Pack. I don't understand. Catherine gestured to the living room. Let's sit, shall we? This won't take long. The man opened his portfolio on our coffee table, the one James and I had picked out together on our first anniversary. He spread out documents, all bearing the Whitmore family crest at the top. Mrs. Whitmore, he began. Miss Morgan, Catherine corrected smoothly. That's your maiden name, isn't it, dear? I nodded, numb. Good. Miss Morgan, I'm Lawrence Hoffman, the Whitmore family attorney. I'm here to inform you that your occupancy of this residence is being terminated, effective immediately. My ears began to ring. What are you talking about? This is my home. Mine and James's. Actually, Vanessa interjected, the deed is in the Whitmore family trust's name. James is merely a beneficiary with conditional occupancy rights. Rights that do not extend to you, Catherine added. Now that certain conditions have been breached, my hands began to shake. What conditions? What breaches? Hoffman slid a document toward me. This is a copy of the prenuptial agreement you signed before your marriage. Section 7. Paragraph 3 specifically states that in the event of financial impropriety or actions detrimental to the Whitmore family interests, the Whitmore Trust reserves the right to protect its assets. I stared at the paper, remembering how James had assured me the prenup was just a formality. How he'd promised me we'd never need it. This is insane, I whispered. James would never agree to this. Catherine's smile tightened. James is well aware of the situation. Why do you think he's conveniently away? He asked us to handle it discreetly. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. You're lying. Let me call him. By all means, Vanessa said, gesturing to my phone on the side table. With trembling fingers, I dialed James's number. It went straight to voicemail. I tried again, and again. He's in meetings all day, Catherine said, checking her watch. Very important meetings. I don't believe you, I said, but my voice lacked conviction. Believe what you like, Vanessa replied. But you have 2 hours to collect your personal belongings. We've arranged for a car to take you wherever you need to go. 2 hours. To pack up 3 years of marriage. 3 years of what I thought was love. Why are you doing this? I asked, tears finally spilling over. What have I ever done to you? Catherine stood, smoothing her impeccable pantsuit. You've done enough damage, Olivia. James was on track to take over the company before he met you. Now he's drowning in debt, making risky investments, neglecting his responsibilities. We're simply correcting course. By throwing me out? Without even letting me talk to my husband. Ex-husband, soon enough, Vanessa murmured. That's when I saw the divorce papers, sitting at the bottom of the stack. You can't force him to divorce me, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew they could. They could force James to do anything. We're not forcing anything, Catherine said coolly. We're protecting our son, our family, our legacy. You were never part of that legacy, Olivia. You were a detour. The next 2 hours passed in a blur. I packed what I could, clothes, a few books, my laptop. The jewelry James had given me, I left behind. It felt tainted now. Every glittering stone a reminder of a lie. Vanessa followed me from room to room, cataloging what I took like a prison guard. When I paused at a photo of James and me on our honeymoon, she gently removed it from my hands. Family property, she said. The frame is Whitmore heirloom silver. Not once did my phone ring. Not once did James call to explain, to apologize, to stop this madness. When the 2 hours were up, a sleek black car idled in the driveway. The driver loaded my pathetic collection of suitcases into the trunk while I stood on the front steps, staring at what I'd thought was my home. Where should I tell the driver to take you? Catherine asked, her voice devoid of any real concern. I thought of my mother's tiny apartment, already too small for her alone. Of friends who wouldn't understand this sudden fall from grace. The Meridian Hotel, I said, naming the first place that came to mind. I had enough in my personal account for a few nights. After that, I had no idea. As the car pulled away, I watched in the rearview mirror as Catherine closed the front door. Not a slam, just a quiet, definitive click. I called James 17 times that day, texted him twice as many, left voicemails that degraded from confusion to anger to pleading. On the 18th call, a woman's voice answered. James Whitmore's phone. I need to speak to my husband, I said, my voice raw from crying. I'm sorry, Mr. Whitmore has instructed me to inform any callers that he's unavailable. Tell him it's his wife, I insisted. A pause. Ma'am, my instructions regarding Mrs. Whitmore were very specific. The line ended. That night, alone in a hotel room I couldn't afford for long, I stared at the ceiling and finally accepted the truth. I had been excised from the Whitmore family like a tumor. Clean, clinical, complete. I had no home, no husband, no future, at least not the one I'd planned. What I did have was my name, Olivia Morgan, not Whitmore, never truly Whitmore. And I had something else, something Catherine and Vanessa and even James hadn't managed to take from me. my dignity. As I drifted into an exhausted sleep, one thought crystallized in my mind. This wasn't the end of my story. It was just the end of their chapter. The first month after being thrown out was the hardest. The Meridian Hotel drained my savings in just 10 days. After that, I swallowed my pride and called my old manager at Morton's Books. "Olivia?" Maggie sounded genuinely surprised. "I thought you were living the high life with your fancy husband." "That didn't work out," I said, my voice steady despite the hollow ache in my chest. "I was wondering if you had any openings, even part-time." The pause on the line lasted just long enough to make my stomach clench. "We're fully staffed at Morton's," she finally said. "But my sister manages a cafe downtown. They're always looking for help." That's how I ended up behind the counter at the Daily Grind, serving overpriced lattes to hurried business people who never looked me in the eye. Some days, I imagine seeing James or Vanessa walk in, picture the shock on their faces when they saw me in my coffee-stained apron. But they never came. The Whitmores didn't frequent places like the Daily Grind. For 6 weeks, I slept on my friend Danny's couch. Every night, I stared at the ceiling, mentally calculating how long it would take to save enough for my own place. The answer was always the same: too long. On the 7th week, Danny left a community college brochure on my makeshift bed. "They're offering night classes in business administration," she said casually. "Thought you might be interested." I almost laughed. "On a barista salary? There are scholarships. And loans." She shrugged. "Just a thought." That night, instead of staring at the ceiling, I pored over the brochure. By morning, I'd made a decision. I enrolled in night classes while working double shifts at the cafe. My hands permanently smelled of coffee beans, and my eyes burned from studying in the dim light of Danny's living room. But for the first time since those black-suited movers had packed up my life, I felt something stirring inside me. Purpose. 3 months in, Professor Harlow kept me after class. "Your analysis of the case study was impressive," she said, leaning against her desk. "Have you considered focusing on business consulting?" I shook my head. "I'm just trying to get a degree that will land me a decent job." She smiled. "Ms. Morgan, decent jobs are for decent people. You're not decent, you're exceptional." No one had called me exceptional since James in the beginning. Before his family's opinion of me became his own. Professor Harlow became my mentor. When I landed a small studio apartment thanks to my promotion to cafe manager, she brought me a plant as a housewarming gift. "Asparagus fern," she explained. "Nearly impossible to finish. Thrives even when neglected." Her eyes held mine. "Reminded me of you." By the end of my first year, I was earning top marks while balancing work and a small internship at a local marketing firm. I'd stopped checking my phone for messages from James. Stopped flinching when I saw expensive cars that resembled Catherine's Mercedes. The divorce papers arrived without warning on a Tuesday morning. My signature was all that was needed. James had already signed. No alimony. No division of assets. Just a clean, surgical cut. I signed without crying. Then I took the extra copy and burned it in my tiny kitchen sink, watching the Whitmore family crest curl and blacken in the flames. That night, I created my first business plan. Morgan Consulting grew slowly at first. I started with small businesses, cafes like the Daily Grind, boutiques struggling with social media marketing, local services needing help with customer retention. My rates were low, but my results were impressive. Word spread. My client list expanded. By the time I completed my degree, I was earning enough to rent a proper office space. Nothing fancy, just a small room with a second-hand desk and enough wall space for my newly framed diploma. On opening day, Danny brought champagne in paper cups. To Olivia Morgan, she toasted, who got knocked down and came back swinging. 5 more years passed in a blur of hard work, calculated risks, and steady growth. I hired my first employee, then my second and third. Moved to a larger office. Specialized in crisis management for mid-sized companies. Built a reputation for turning failing businesses around. I dated occasionally, but never seriously. There was something freeing about being alone, about answering to no one but myself. The weight of the Whitmore expectations had been so heavy that its absence felt like flying. On the 10th anniversary of what I now called my Liberation Day, the day I was thrown out of the Whitmore mansion, I signed the lease on the penthouse office suite at Crawford Tower. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, where I'd once felt so small, so unworthy. My assistant, Zoe, whistled as she walked in with a box of my things. "Nice view," she said, setting the box on my massive new desk. "You can see half the city from here." Including, though I didn't point it out, the distinctive roofline of Whitmore Holdings headquarters. "Ms. Morgan," Zoe continued, "the team wants to take you out tonight to celebrate. 10 years is a big milestone." I smiled. 10 years of what? Of Morgan Consulting, of course. I hadn't told anyone, that today marked a different kind of anniversary. That seemed like giving the Whitmores too much power, too much real estate in my story. "I'd love that," I said. "But first, I need you to pull some data for me. I'm considering expanding into corporate restructuring for larger enterprises." "Any specific industry?" I turned to look out at the city, at the building that had once represented everything I couldn't have. "Family businesses," I said softly. "Specifically, those facing succession crises." Later that week, Zoe dropped a file on my desk without comment. On top was an article from the business section of the Morning Herald. Whitmore Holdings faces uncertain future amid leadership struggles. The photograph showed an older Robert Whitmore, hair now completely silver, alongside James, who looked more like his father than I remembered. They stood in front of their headquarters, both wearing identical strained smiles. I read the article twice, absorbing every detail. Stock prices falling, failed expansion attempts, rumors of internal conflict, and the most interesting tidbit, seeking outside investors for the first time in the company's 100-year history. Opportunity had come knocking. The only question was whether I would answer. My finger hovered over the intercom. "Zoe," I said finally, "clear my schedule for next week. I think it's time for Morgan Consulting to make a big move." The universe, it seemed, had a perfect sense of timing and an even better sense of irony. I spent 3 days analyzing the Whitmore Holdings data before making any decisions. This wasn't about revenge. At least, that's what I told myself as I pored over quarterly reports, market projections, and executive profiles late into the night. This was business. Just business. The picture that emerged wasn't pretty. Robert Whitmore's health was failing, and James had proven himself woefully unprepared to take full control. A series of misguided acquisitions had drained their capital reserves. A harassment lawsuit against a senior executive, Vanessa's husband, ironically, had damaged their reputation. And a new competitor had emerged, siphoning off their most lucrative clients. They weren't just treading water, they were actively sinking. "What's your interest in Whitmore Holdings?" Zoe asked on the 4th morning, setting a coffee on my desk. "They're hardly our usual client profile." I smiled. "Sometimes opportunities find us, not the other way around." "Well, their pitch deck just arrived. Marked confidential and urgent." She placed a sleek folder in front of me. "Apparently, they're meeting with potential investors next week." My fingers traced the embossed Whitmore family crest on the folder, the same crest that had adorned the prenuptial agreement they'd used to discard me. The same crest I'd watched burn in my kitchen sink years ago. "Set up a meeting," I said. "But use Emmy Consulting for now." "Emmy?" "Morgan Enterprises," I explained. "Our new investment division." Zoe raised an eyebrow but said nothing. She'd been with me long enough to trust my instincts. "And Zoe? Don't use my name in any of the correspondence. Just sign as managing director." "Playing mysterious investor?" she asked, a hint of amusement in her voice. "Something like that." That night, I dreamed of Catherine Whitmore for the first time in years. In the dream, she was drowning in dark water, her perfectly manicured hand reaching toward me. I stood on the shore, watching, neither moving to help nor turning away. I woke unsettled, questioning my motives. Was this about proving my worth? About business opportunity? Or was it something darker, more primal, the satisfaction of watching those who hurt me finally understand what they'd thrown away? The answer, I realized as morning light filtered through my bedroom windows, was all of the above. And I was at peace with that complexity. For the next 3 days, I immersed myself in preparation. I reviewed Whitmore Holdings' entire corporate structure, identified their weaknesses, and developed 3 potential restructuring plans. I practiced remaining neutral when hearing the Whitmore name spoken aloud. I selected my outfit, a custom-tailored charcoal suit that cost more than 6 months' rent at that first studio apartment. The Whitmore team confirmed. Zoe informed me on Monday morning. Thursday at 2 p.m., their headquarters. I nodded. Book a car service. And I'll need the Morgan Enterprises portfolio ready for presentation. Already done.
But
She hesitated. Shouldn't you send someone else? You usually don't handle initial meetings personally.
not this time, I said.
This one's mine. Thursday arrived with perfect dramatic timing, exactly 15 years to the day since Catherine and Vanessa had stood in my foyer with their family lawyer. 15 years since they'd given me 2 hours to pack up my life. My driver pulled up to the imposing glass tower of Whitmore Holdings at precisely 1:45 p.m. I stepped out, taking a moment to absorb the scene. The logo had been updated, but the building still exuded the same cold, impenetrable power I remembered, a fortress of wealth and privilege. The receptionist smiled professionally. "Welcome to Whitmore Holdings. How may I help you?" "I have a 2 o'clock with the executive team. ME Consulting." Recognition flickered in her eyes. "Of course. They're expecting you in the main boardroom." She lowered her voice slightly. "Mr. Whitmore Sr. specifically came in for this meeting." I allowed myself a small smile. Robert Whitmore, the patriarch himself, had dragged his ailing body to the office. Things must be even more desperate than I'd realized. The elevator ride to the 40th floor gave me time to center myself. My heartbeat quickened, but my resolve remained firm. This wasn't the nervous Olivia Morgan who had once felt unworthy in their presence. This was Olivia Morgan, CEO and founder of a company that could save, or sink, the Whitmore legacy with a single decision. When the elevator doors opened, an anxious-looking young assistant was waiting. "Ms. Morgan? I'm Trevor, Mr. Whitmore's assistant. The board is assembled and ready for you."
So, they did know my name.
"Interesting. Please follow me," he continued, leading me down a hallway lined with portraits of Whitmore patriarchs. At the end hung a newer portrait, James, looking solemnly out from an expensive frame, every inch his father's son. Trevor paused outside the boardroom doors. "May I take your coat?" "No, thank you," I replied. "I prefer to keep it with me." He nodded, then opened the door with a flourish. "ME Consulting has arrived, sir." I stepped into a room I'd been in only once before, the night Robert Whitmore had toasted my engagement to James with words that still echoed in my memory. "To new additions to the family, may they prove worthy of the Whitmore name." 8 faces turned toward me. Most I didn't recognize: board members, executives, lawyers. But 3 faces stopped me cold. Robert, noticeably aged and using a cane now. Catherine, still elegant but thinner, her imperious posture slightly diminished. And James, his boyish good looks hardened into something more severe, a permanent crease between his brows. For one electric moment, no one spoke. No one seemed to breathe. Then recognition dawned, moving like a wave across their faces. Robert's eyes widened. Catherine's hand froze midway to her water glass. And James simply stared, the color draining from his face, as if he'd seen a ghost. "Hello," I said into the stunned silence, my voice steady and clear. "I believe you requested a meeting with ME Consulting. Morgan Enterprises." I set my portfolio on the table. "I'm Olivia Morgan, CEO and principal investor. I understand you're looking for a lifeboat." The silence that followed was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. For 15 years, I had imagined this moment. In my darkest hours, when loneliness had gripped me like a vice, I'd fantasized about standing before them again, successful, powerful, untouchable. Reality, as it turned out, was infinitely more satisfying. "Olivia," James finally managed, my name falling from his lips like a stone. Ms. Morgan, I corrected, taking the seat at the opposite end of the table from Robert. Let's keep this professional, shall we? The other board members exchanged confused glances. A silver-haired man in an expensive suit cleared his throat. You know each other? Catherine recovered first, her socialite training kicking in. Ms. Morgan was briefly married to James, years ago. Her smile was glacial, before she pursued other opportunities. How fascinating that you phrase it that way, Catherine, I said, my voice pleasant but firm. I believe your exact words were, "You've done enough damage," as you had me escorted from my home with 2 suitcases. The silver-haired man's eyebrows shot up. Ancient history, Robert interjected, his voice weaker than I remembered, but still commanding. We're here to discuss a potential investment partnership, not family matters. Are we? I opened my portfolio. Because from where I'm sitting, your family matters and business matters seem rather entangled. I began my presentation, methodically outlining Whitmore Holdings' vulnerabilities, their cash flow problems, their outdated management structure, their failure to adapt to changing markets. With each slide, I watched Robert's face grow more grim, Catherine's more rigid, and James's more shocked. Your largest division is operating at a 40% loss, I noted, tapping the relevant chart. Your executive compensation is 30% above industry standard, while your mid-level employee retention is abysmal. And your latest product launch was delayed 3 times, costing you market share you'll never recover. We're aware of our challenges, Vanessa said stiffly. I hadn't noticed her enter, but she now stood by the door, arms crossed defensively. That's why we're seeking investment partners. Investment partners, I repeated. Not a salvation committee. Robert's cane thumped against the floor.
Enough.
What are your terms? I closed my portfolio slowly, deliberately. Before we discuss terms, I'd like a private word with the Whitmore family. Just the family. The other board members looked to Robert, who nodded curtly. Chairs scraped as they filed out, stealing curious glances at me as they passed. When the door closed, 5 of us remained. Robert, Catherine, James, Vanessa, and me. Well, I said, leaning back in my chair. This is familiar. Except last time we were all together, you were explaining why I was the source of all James's problems. That was a different time, Catherine said, her voice strained. Circumstances were complicated. Complicated? I echoed. Is that what we're calling it now? James finally spoke, his voice hoarse. Olivia, Ms. Morgan. No one could have predicted you'd become this. He gestured vaguely at me, at my success. That's exactly the problem, James. No one in this room believed I could be anything without the Whitmore name attached to mine. I looked each of them in the eye, one by one. You were wrong. We didn't come here to be lectured about the past, Vanessa snapped. If you're only here for some twisted revenge. No, I interrupted. Revenge would be walking out that door and letting Whitmore Holdings sink. Revenge would be buying your competitors and using them to dismantle your company piece by piece. I smiled thinly. I considered both options. Robert's hand trembled slightly as he reached for his water glass. What do you want, Olivia? The question hung in the air. What did I want? 15 years ago, all I'd wanted was to be accepted, to be enough.
Now?
I want to invest in Whitmore Holdings, I said simply. My analysis indicates that with proper restructuring, your company can be profitable again within 18 months. I'm prepared to make a significant capital injection in exchange for 30% ownership and a seat on the board. Catherine's eyes widened. 30%? That's non-negotiable. I finished for her. And there's one more condition. James leaned forward. What condition? A public acknowledgement of your treatment of me 15 years ago. A formal apology from the Whitmore family, published in the business section of the Morning Herald. The silence that followed was deafening. Absolutely not, Catherine hissed. The scandal would. The scandal, I said evenly, would be nothing compared to what happens when your creditors call in their loans next quarter. Which they will. Robert and James exchanged glances. You can't be serious, Vanessa said. You want us to humiliate ourselves publicly? Admit to what, exactly? To the truth, I said. That you tossed aside a family member when she became inconvenient. That you scapegoated me for James's financial mistakes. I turned to James directly. That you let your wife be thrown out of her home while you hid across the country. James flinched, as if I'd slapped him. I didn't know they would. Don't. I cut him off. Don't insult my intelligence by lying now. Robert tapped his fingers on the table, thinking. The apology could be carefully worded, professional, a simple acknowledgement of past misunderstandings. It will be truthful, I insisted, or there's no deal. And if we refuse? Catherine asked, chin raised defiantly. I gathered my materials. Then I wish you the best of luck finding another investor willing to overlook your company's structural problems and family dysfunction. You have my card. Let me know your decision by tomorrow. I stood, smoothing my suit jacket. For what it's worth, I'm not doing this out of malice. Your company employs hundreds of people. They shouldn't suffer because the Whitmore family can't admit their mistakes. As I walked toward the door, James called after me. Olivia, wait. I paused, hand on the doorknob, not turning around. You didn't have to come back, he said quietly. After everything, you could have let us fail. Now I did turn, taking in the tableau before me. These people who had once held such power over my happiness, now looking small and afraid. You're right, I said. I didn't have to come back. I chose to. That's the difference between us, James. I make my choices consciously. You let others make yours for you. I open the door. Tomorrow, 5 p.m., my office. As I walked through the Whitmore Holdings lobby for the second time that day, my step was lighter. The weight I'd carried for 15 years, the questions, the self-doubt, the what-ifs, had finally been set down. Whatever they decided, I had won. I had faced my past and found it couldn't hurt me anymore. My driver was waiting outside. Where to, Ms. Morgan? I smiled. Home. They arrived at my office at 4:45 p.m. the next day, all four of them, moving as a unit like they always had. Catherine's eyes scanned my penthouse office, taking in the awards on the walls, the view of the city, the elegant furniture that made no apologies for its luxury. Nice space, James said, his attempt at casual falling flat. Thank you. Please sit. I gestured to the conference table where Zoe had arranged water, coffee, and the contracts I'd had my legal team prepare overnight. Robert eased himself into a chair with a wince. You've done well for yourself, Olivia. I have. I agreed, not bothering with false modesty. Which is why I'm in a position to help you now. Vanessa's mouth tightened. Have you considered our concerns about the public statement? I have, I said, sliding a document across the table. This is the statement I've drafted. It's factual, direct, and mentions no specific financial details about your current situation. They huddled over it, reading in silence. The statement was simple, an acknowledgement that 15 years ago, Olivia Morgan had been unjustly removed from the Whitmore family under false pretenses, an apology for the pain caused, and a recognition of her current role as a business leader and new partner in Whitmore Holdings. This is surprisingly reasonable, Robert said finally. Catherine's face remained pinched. People will talk. They'll ask questions.
People always talk, I said.
But they'll talk far more about Whitmore Holdings declaring bankruptcy than about one diplomatic statement. James looked up from the paper. You're not asking for details about what happened back then. The world doesn't need to know that your gambling debts were the real reason for our financial troubles, I said calmly. Or that you knew your family was planning to throw me out while you hid in Seattle. His face flushed. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like, James? I asked, genuinely curious after all these years. He swallowed hard. I was weak. I let them convince me it was for the best, that you'd be better off without being dragged down by my mistakes. He looked at his hands. By the time I realized what I'd done, you were gone. And my pride, my cowardice, kept me from finding you. It was the closest thing to honesty I'd ever heard from him. Water under the bridge, I said, surprising myself with how little his confession affected me. Let's focus on the future of Whitmore Holdings. For the next hour, we went through the investment terms. My 30% stake.
My seat on the board.
The restructuring plan that would require leaner operations, new marketing strategies, and most painfully for them, a reduction in executive compensation. These cuts will affect you too, Vanessa pointed out. Your family. The Whitmore stopped being my family 15 years ago, I said. And I'm not taking a salary from the company. My compensation will come from the company's recovery and growth. As we neared the end of the meeting, Robert cleared his throat. There's one more thing, Olivia. He pulled out a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. This belongs to you. Inside was my engagement ring, the one I'd left behind when I was forced out. A 3-carat emerald-cut diamond in a platinum setting. Once, it had represented everything I'd ever wanted. Keep it, I said without hesitation. Consider it the first payment toward the company's future. Catherine's eyes widened slightly. You don't want it? What would I do with it? I asked. Wear it as a reminder? I don't need reminders anymore. The contracts were signed. Hands were shaken. The Whitmore family filed out of my office a humbler version of themselves than when they'd entered. All except James, who lingered by the door. Can I ask you something? He said quietly. I nodded. Are you happy? Such a simple question. Yet it caught me off guard. Yes, I said after a moment. Not in the way I once thought I would be. Not in the way we planned. But yes, I'm happy. He nodded, a sad smile crossing his face. I'm glad. At least one of us got that right. Then he was gone, leaving me alone with the weight of what had just transpired. The next morning, the statement appeared in the business section of the Morning Herald. Small, dignified, but unmistakable in its meaning. My phone rang constantly, colleagues, business associates, even old friends from my barista days, all wanting to know the story behind the cryptic apology. I declined all interviews. This wasn't about public spectacle. It was about setting the record straight and setting myself free. 3 months into the restructuring, Whitmore Holdings showed its first profit in 8 quarters. 6 months in, we launched a new product line that exceeded all projections. By the end of the year, the company's stock had risen 40%. I attended board meetings, offered strategic guidance, and kept my distance emotionally. Professional, but never personal. The Whitmores seemed to understand this unspoken boundary. Catherine approached me after one particularly successful quarterly meeting. You've saved us, she said, her voice lacking its former imperial tone. Not just the company, the family. I didn't do it for the family, I replied. I did it because it was a sound business decision. She nodded. Nevertheless, thank you. It was the closest thing to humility I'd ever seen from her. On the anniversary of my investment, 1 year to the day since I'd walked back into their lives, I received a small package at my office. Inside was a framed photo I'd never seen before, James and me on our wedding day, laughing as we fed each other cake. A candid moment I hadn't known was captured. The note attached simply read, "You deserved better." We all did. I placed the photo in my desk drawer rather than displaying it. Not because it pained me, but because it belonged to a different life, a life I had outgrown. That evening, I stood at my office window looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, the Whitmores were continuing their lives, changed but intact. And I was here, in the empire I'd built with my own hands, my own mind, my own heart. They had gotten my help, my business acumen, my capital, my vision, but not my heart. Never again my heart. That belonged to me now. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything.